Hi, welcome to the One Love Fits All online conference benefiting Embody Love Movement. I am Dr. Tiffany Denny. I am the Executive Director of Embody Love Movement, and today I get to introduce you to a conversation that I am not a part of, but am so excited to see. This conversation is between Embody Love Movement's founder, Dr. Melody Moore, and one of our most treasured advisors, Kerri Kelly. Um, Both of these women are so smart and full of passion and full of heart and well-spoken, and it is worth every second of listening to them speak. So I can't wait to see this conversation between the two of them. And they're going to be talking about Embody Love Movement, where we've been, where we are now, where we're going, and why. And so this is a great opportunity to learn more about our organization, our work, and why it matters. Thank you so much for joining us for this conference, and please enjoy this conversation.
True freedom involves the understanding of our true human spirit within. It dispels the lie, the myth of an for saying hopelessness. Who are we? Powerful beyond measure. Who are we? Power of the Creator.
Welcome back, y'all, to the Embody Love Movement online conference. My name is Kerri Kelly, and I'm here with one of my favorite human beings on the planet, Dr. Melody Moore, who all of you probably should know because she's the founder of the Embody Love Movement. And I'm excited, Mel, to just dig in with you, and also to really understand how this idea and this movement came to become a reality. And I've known you since before you birthed Embody Love Movement. We go way back.
We go way back, which is why I got to choose.
I love that.
Who, right? Like the executive director, Tiffany Denny, asked, who do you want to interview you? And I was like, nobody but Kerri Kelly really understands this journey for me, because you've been on it with me and really guided me through and coached me and Embody Love Movement through most of it. So thanks for doing this particular interview, and for everything you do and have done and have been for Embody Love Movement, and most personally.
Well, of course, personally. I mean, it's been a privilege to bear witness to the idea come out of you and your life's experience, and then to watch it come to life as a thing that you birthed, and then to watch it grow and change and iterate. And my favorite part is the way in which the community has really taken it on themselves, right? Now it's sort of out of your hands, and it's the kids have gone off to college and are becoming their own, right? Radical expression of the embodiment of love. And that to me is the greatest metric of success for an organization. And I feel like that's happening. We're getting to see that now. And that's so fucking exciting.
It's been happening. And I'll answer the question about where was it seated? But I think it's more important, and certainly it's more awe-inspiring. And I really mean that. We had our summit and you were there last weekend, and I'm in awe of everyone, of this community, of the people who have come in their own way and through their own lens and location and with their own language in their own communities, and have really made this their life's work. Or I shouldn't say that. It was already their life's work. Made Embody Love Movement the conduit through which they offer their life's work and are in exchange around this DNA and this idea and this vision. So I feel like as a founder, and I know actually you feel this way too, I get way more credit than is actually my due. I'm grateful to have been the one that was called into first beginning. And even that, I had a lot of collaboration around the founding of this organization, but really, it's not me. Definitely would not be anything that it's become if it were just me by myself having this mission to make a difference. Hardly anything really would have gone down, because I don't have very many skills at all. And I mean,
I believe you, and I think that's humble, and it's just mutual, right? The way movements grow and become themselves, and I know you know this, and we're going to talk a little bit about this later, but you know, movement participants and movement leaders, taking the baton, taking on the torch, and making it their own, and contributing their unique and authentic gifts to the movement is actually what makes it better.
Yeah.
And that feels really countercultural. That's why I say that. And you're a unique kind of leader in that you really have understood that all along, right? Like you were the catalyst for this, but all along you were like, what do you all want this to be? Take it and run with it, which is just a really radical kind of leadership.
One of the first books you told me to read when Embody Love Movement, at the very inception of Embody Love Movement, when we were in Child's Pose, which I think we always return back to Child's Pose. And that's one of the things I love about this first decade of the organization.
That's right. That's a great analogy.
Right? Was it called The Starfish and the Spider?
Yeah.
The name of that book, which really landed in me that this won't work if we're a spider, meaning if there's a leader and there's a head of the organization and it's hierarchical, which is really patriarchal, it won't work, or the ways in which it will work won't be sustainable, and they'll be depleting for everyone, mostly for me, but really for everybody. And how can we create an organization that operates more like a starfish, that empowers everyone who wants to be involved and really celebrates and welcomes leadership and strength and ideas and creativity, which has required so much personal learning for me to step back and lean back and recognize I really don't have it. I really don't have it. And it's also been so supportive because I don't have to carry everything.
Yeah.
I don't get to, and more so, I don't have to.
Yeah.
It's like you just said, is why it's working and why it's sustained.
Yeah. And we're also seeing the implications, right, of that like old school top down hierarchical power on the top structure, across our culture and across our country, right? So we really do need people like you, and also all of the leaders that are coming up through this organization, to embody and to model new kinds of leadership that is decentralized, that's shared, that's humble. So thank you for that. And we're going to get into like what that really looks like in practice a little bit later, but I do want to go back to the origin, because, this isn't just like an idea you had one day. Like this really did come from your life's experience, and it was brewing and emerging for a really long time. And I just happened to be with you when the idea sort of like came to formation, but I'd love for you to share with folks what it looks like to listen to your truth, to honor your life's experience, and to let that really become centered in your purpose.
Yeah. Okay. Something I've been thinking about a lot lately is how training and education often sets us up to not allow ourselves to be in our own process and in our own evolution in a way that's in integrity with ourselves. So at the time of the intersection of my awakening to this isn't working, this kind of traditional model of clinical psychology that I was taught in graduate school and in internships, and that was reinforced by supervisors, this doctor-patient, this side of glass, that side of glass, like in a treatment center where I worked, in a hospital where I worked, this idea that I'm helping or I'm serving, and there's something that I have that you don't have. Really, I was starting to awaken at the time that I came to an off the mat into the world training where you were the ED of that organization at the time. I was like, those seeds had been planted within me through my own practice, because as a psychologist, I was also a yoga, not teacher, but student. And I started practicing yoga at the same time I started graduate school for psychology. And so those two had always been, they weren't coalesced. They weren't happening together, but they were happening together inside of me. And I started really feeling, working with clients with eating disorders, the range of eating disorders and the range of body dysmorphia, which I have my own relationship with, especially body dysmorphia. I started seeing how, as their therapist, if I'm keeping it with them at the level of cognition, if we're sitting across from one another and we're talking, what's happening often is we're over understanding, we're over intellectualizing. My experience with those with whom I had the privilege to work is they were super smart, brilliant, and could understand lay all of it out, but there wasn't behavior change. And at the root, there wasn't really the kind of thriving or the investment in self-acceptance or self-acknowledgement or self-approval that I really wanted for them and for me. Mm-hmm. So all these things, it was just like, of course, divine timing were occurring for me as I came into the Off the Mat into the World intensive. And look, I came in super arrogant. Like the description of that training was like, we're going to look at your core wounds. And I was like, whatever, I'm in psychoanalysis. I'm on the couch daily. I've been in therapy for years. I am a therapist. I got it. And I was so wrong and completely humble that I came in and was like, heart open. Once I got into my body, those same questions were interrogated so differently because they were felt at the level of sensation. And you know this, that's why the head nods, right? Once I could understand physiologically that the traumas that were held in my body, that my own experiences of feeling isolated, feeling rejected, breaking my own heart, self-betrayal, once I could get really in touch with that, a complete shift happened inside of me. And in knowing that this is the kind of work I want to be about in the world, these are the kind of people that I want to be doing that work with, and that I want to be holding me accountable. And so it was this letting go and shedding of the things my ego was really attached to, being a faculty member at the med school, right? Being a psychoanalytic trainee and all these things. I was like, oh, wait, that's wonderful for some folks. And for me, it wasn't in integrity with what I knew in my body and my guts to be true. So yes, the vision of Embody Love movement came right directly out of that training. I still have my journal where I'm writing down like the names of people that I knew would be invested and interested, that I could call in immediately for collaboration. Really, none of it was on my own. And I think I immediately like tagged you and said, is there a way that you can help me? You're an executive director. What is that? What is that like? How do you do it? So personally, I was coming from a family system, and we know a culture where the idea of self-acceptance was just not available to me, especially for me as it related to appearance. I came from a family where, like a lot of especially white middle class, upper class families, where what was celebrated was an appearance. I heard so many compliments given to my mom growing up about how beautiful she was and how thin she was, and people asking her questions about how did she come to look the way that she did, and can they help? And my mom like taught aerobics classes circa Jane Fonda in church, like in the fellowship hall growing up. And I
can totally see that, by the way.
I know, knowing my mom, who's amazing and is a product of that same culture, was swimming in that same culture that continued to celebrate and reinforce these messages that what was valuable about her was the way that she looked. And she didn't have a lens of social location. She didn't have an understanding of whiteness or white privilege, just that. And that's what I observed. And I think it's really important for parents to understand, although it's never a parent's fault, if their child develops body dysmorphia, negative body image, and eating disorder, any of it, it's like nobody's fault. It's multi-determined, all of it. And children, daughters, I certainly was, are listening to the ways that parents are talking about themselves and talking about their bodies. And so unbeknownst to my mom, who was doing her best with the level of resources and awareness she had at the time, everything she said about herself and about other women, I took on to mean thin means good. Thin means acceptable. Thin means worthy of love. And anything other than that is in the rejectable, isolated, unworthy category. And so I had this internal striving to a much greater degree than I even realized to not only be thin, but also to be fat phobic. And to not only be beautiful, but also to recognize that literally my acceptability, my belonging, which we all are wired to need for survival, hinged on my being attractive. And that's such a setup. It's such a setup for all
by
of
design.
right? For all of us, exactly, by design, I'm sure we'll get into that, for all of us to feel this internal self-oppression. So I know that's like, I'm bringing in a lot just answering that one question of what was the inception and what were the seeds, but it was both. It was like my own journey personally, my own journey, if you can call it a career, dharma, whatever, the way that I offer who I am to the world in a way that there's a money exchange, or sometimes not. All of that was happening at the same time that I met a community. And I just think this is really valuable because I don't think for a second Embody Love movement would have happened without Off the Mat Into the World and without you being part of that organization, or you were a big part of it. It was like, oh, this is possible. There is a possibility here that I never would have imagined on my own. And so all of those things coming together at the same time just allowed for I think for this idea to be seated.
Yeah, I love that. And I do, it's funny, I'm reflecting on how this work of discovering one's purpose is really inside out and relational, right? Like that you didn't just come up with an idea one day and say like, I think I'm going to do this, that you really honored your lived experience and you really reckoned with what's missing. Right? Like what's missing and how am I impacted by the world? And so I say this because I'm hearing what I know to be principles of your theory of change, right? Like some of like the core tenets of Embody Love movement that have really shaped your work in the world. And one of the things I'm hearing is embodiment and the role of embodiment in transformational work, which I hear you say is sometimes missing from psychology. I hear you saying relationship and the way in which we're impacted by one another, right? Like that this work isn't in isolation, like we're not doing it in a bubble or in a box by ourselves, that it's really interconnected. And I also hear you naming that, and I loved especially how you referenced this with your mom, that we're swimming in a system that's designed a certain way to make us correlate beauty and worthiness, right, and value with body image, with external, like with how we look basically, and how society thinks that we should look. And so are these like real core tenets of the work of Embody Love movement?
Absolutely. You call it, and I love this, the DNA. They're the DNA. And one of the greatest gifts for me of being a part of this organization is just my own growth and seeing I can hold something up as a value and not be in integrity with that value. Our friend Nikki Myers often says, you don't know what you don't know. Mm-hmm. You don't know what you don't know. And so over the last decade, as I've come to understand social location, proximity to access and to power, and specifically around not only my whiteness, but also around positionality, about what the culture upholds as an acceptable body, an acceptable shape, an acceptable size, an acceptable look, and how close I am in every axis of that seat of privilege, that without community, without relationship, without a systemic lens, I had no idea about that, right? So I'm sitting in my own sense of body dysmorphia and sense of not enoughness, which is an experience of suffering. But when it's considered based in the systemic lens of real trauma and real oppression and real marginalization, that folks in larger bodies, that folks with different skin colors, that folks, right, with disabled bodies, with transgender bodies or gender fluid bodies are experiencing, really, right? So it's like, it has allowed for such an awakening within me, and then to see the harm it's caused for me to be at the center, or at the one who seated, the founder of this organization, without that systemic lens and without participation from folks on the margins in creating some of the curriculum and creating and being decision makers and holders of power about who's on the board and how are funds used and how are funds gained and where are they disseminated, and like everything involved. It's been such a process of learning for me and such a necessary process.
I'd love for you to say more about that, because I imagine that's a tricky line to walk, right? That, and it's really a paradox, right? That we are all suffering at the hands of this culture, at a culture that values the external, how we look, that celebrates comparison, right? That perpetuates not enoughness so that they can sell us more shit, right? We're all swimming in that water, and yet how we're impacted by that culture is really different based on our location, our identity, our skin color, our body size. How do you walk that line as a leader so that everybody can understand that, yes, we're all swimming in these waters, we're all impacted, we're all suffering in some way, and yet we're not all having the same experience?
Yeah, I think one of the things you just named is really important as a leader. It's one of the things is not being the only leader. Right? Given my positionality, not being the only leader, not being the only one in front and teaching and holding a position of power, inviting other people in who are on the margins and do have a different lived experience, because I can only speak for mine. And I just think full transparency, right? To the extent that I can, not centering my suffering, not centering my experience, but being able to name, these are the places where I'm getting it wrong, where I'm in the process of falling on my face, where I couldn't see what I didn't know. And I do believe, another thing Nikki Myers says, is you can't heal what you don't acknowledge. That it's just been really important for me as I've evolved and as I've come to understand things that I should have known already, acknowledging that and being really truthful and transparent about it. I don't believe that sitting in the guilt and sitting in the shame of recognizing harm has been caused, it would really benefit anyone. And I do believe our liberation is bound. I do believe it's just as necessary for folks who are sitting in all the axes of privilege to do what you just named, to be able to recognize there is a difference between individual suffering and systemic oppression and marginalization. And so I'll talk a little bit about, for me, what that looks like and how to come to understand it. I don't think it's useful to minimize anybody's experience, mostly because I think it creates defensiveness, although I may think of an experience differently. So for me, it's been like when talking to folks who like me, and I think relationship is everything, context is everything, who like me are sitting in a white body and a thin body and a body that is physically able, that can see and that can hear, and like all the privilege that passes as straight and that passes as cisgender, that there's a way of saying, yes, your experience of suffering is real. And especially for folks who struggle with eating disorders, there is a stigma around mental illness, and there is real suffering and often death that comes from having an eating disorder. I mean, I get that, and I can acknowledge it. And that is not the same thing as systemic injustice. It just isn't the same. It's not relatable at all to systemic oppression, to being marginalized based on being in a larger body, based on having a disability, based on having a different color skin, especially that's Black or brown. The privileges that come with living in a thin body, with whiteness, with education, with ability. It's like it is different. Even if there's individual suffering, right? The system, I mean, you know this, you're one of the people who taught me this. The system is operating at a level that certain folks are set up. It's intentional. Access and privilege and resources are not only offered to people that are sitting at the center of privilege, but it's also systemically driven away from and kept away from folks on the margins. And so it's just not a comparative experience. It's not even close to being a comparative experience. So while we all suffer, it can't even be compared to the experience that folks who are systemically oppressed, what they go through and have a lived experience of.
And I really appreciate you articulating that so beautifully, because I think as organizers, and we're all organizing, right? We're organizing groups of people, we're organizing collective consciousness, we're organizing people to do things together. Often we organize from our own personal experience, right? Or we organize people like us.
Right.
And there's a danger in doing that, right? And it's not just about creating more separation, and it's not just about the limitations of only organizing people who look like us or resonate with us or have a similar life's experience or have a similar location, as you named, than us. But it can really erase people's experience.
Absolutely. And that's the harm I believe that I caused when I began Embody Love movement, right? From my own perspective, talk about the danger of a single story, that TED Talk we all love. That missed so much. It missed so many people. It left out so many people, which causes significant harm. And I had to go learn that and go back and wow, okay, who's been left out? Who's been harmed? How have they been harmed? How can we create a different kind of culture? And how can we educate ourselves around privilege, around whiteness, around being able-bodied in ways that we did, and in ways that we didn't know before?
Yeah.
Without retracting from the work, without sitting in the, oh, poor me, right? Without letting fragility get in the way of falling on our face and trying again, and not centering our pain around, I got it wrong.
And that's right. That's like the other side of this work is when we become so fearful, right, of making mistakes, of saying the wrong thing, of not being right, of causing harm, which, I mean, those are like, I think those are real feelings and real concerns. But when it actually silences us, when it makes us small down, when it holds us back from connection and relationship, the cost of that is really high too, right? It's like the cost of causing harm is high and the cost of not doing anything, inaction, is really high. But I think one of the things you're modeling feels really powerful, and it's resilience, right? It's our ability to make mistakes and to like embrace what we don't know and endeavor to do better, and to, right, and to be like really humble in our journey of like learning and growing, and you know, and continue to iterate and evolve and call in for support and ask for help and get educated and identify the places where we're lacking. And so I'd love for you to share, I mean, you already just did that, but like, what are some of the things that you've learned along the way? And even like some of the mistakes that you made where you're like, oh shit, like I didn't know that, and now I do, and that changes things.
We only have, what, 30 minutes for me to tell you all the mistakes that I made.
Hold on, let me get my coffee.
I need a month to like lay out.
I know. But what do you think is worth sharing with this group, right? So that people can, because I think more important than what you say is actually how you model it. Because I think we're so, and this is the culture again at work, we're so afraid of making mistakes. Like it's going to be the end of us.
Right.
And you've survived and thrived, as have I. I've made many, many, many mistakes. But to me, like I have to remind myself of that when I'm sort of teetering on like, oh shit, I think I got this wrong. That like I actually can survive a mistake, and there's an opportunity for growth there.
Right. And one of the things you've taught me actually is that perfectionism is a symptom of our whiteness. Mm-hmm. And that culturally we are taught that we can't get it wrong. There is no room, and we'll be rejected if we make a mistake. And there's so much to say about that, yeah. Which is why Perfectionist Anonymous is a real thing. But for me with this organization, the integrity that I believe in, I mean, the spiritual principles really that I believe in have to do with compassion for self and others, and they have to do with dignity. And so I have to then have a way of getting it wrong, like really getting it wrong in ways that have real consequences for real human beings, and still hold myself with compassion, and still hold myself with dignity, as though I am deserving of respect, even when I royally fuck up. That doesn't shift, that doesn't change. And I really think that's part of self-approval, which is part of the mission of Embody Love movement, to help us rebuild our own self-approval. This is hilarious. My dog has decided to whine right now.
Oh, that's what's happening.
Yeah, we hear you. And oh, good, he stopped. All right. And so I think for me, I have an experience that I'm going to entirely fall apart when I recognize I've really caused harm. And that's been true in my personal life too, in my personal life and in my organizational life, I guess I can call it, that I'm going to get it wrong. And that's actually part of being human. And I don't only mean that for other people, I also mean it for me. And I don't think I could mean it for other people if I didn't mean it for me, really. I mean, I believe we only have the capacity to give away what we have. And when we can't keep it if we don't give it away, but also we can't give it away if we don't have it. And I want to give away compassion. I want to offer people a space where they can fail, where they can make mistakes, where they can get it wrong and know it's okay. You're still human and you're still welcome and you still belong and you still deserve. Worthiness isn't based on always getting it right. And so because I believe that in my body, it also applies to me, and I'm definitely going to fuck up. I have enough experience and evidence of my own. Hold on. Are you kidding me, dude? Come here. Come here.
Just include him in the call.
He's included. In some cultures, right? We know that when people in the community get it wrong and make mistakes, they're called back in. This is specifically true in African communities. They're called back into the tribe, and their song is sung to them, and it's a welcoming. And I want to be that kind of human, not just leader, but human for myself. I have to include myself in that. And so when I see myself gaining an awareness or an insight, it's always going to come with the opportunity to look back at just 1/2 second ago, or maybe a year ago, and recognize, oof, that wasn't great, that wasn't right, that caused harm, that was hurtful in a way that I couldn't have seen then. And so I have to hold that tenet of we're doing the best we can with the level of awareness we have, the level of resource we have, and the level of insight we had. And so how dare I not allow myself to be a human being, to make mistakes, and to always be in a process of learning. And for me, with Embody Love movement specifically, as someone who's seen as a leader, although we're all leaders, if I can be open with that in a way that doesn't hold myself up as a martyr, because I think that kind of high self-esteem is high self-esteem. I don't actually think it's low self-esteem, like in a way that's narcissistic. I mean, if I can just be open and name, this is where I got it wrong, and it's necessary that I acknowledge it so that we can do something differently, so that I can be different. I think that's the only way that I could stay in relationship with myself, and the only way that I would want to be in relationship to Embody Love movement.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned fragility, and one of the other ways I see fragility play out is when we attack each other and when we call each other out. And often that's a defense mechanism of like, I'm vulnerable. And so if I just displace attention onto the bad things other people are doing. Nadia Bolz-Weber said the most amazing thing, and I'm not going to get it right, but she said something like the new addiction is obsessing, like getting obsessed about the ways in which other people are worse than you, like they're doing worse things. Like if we just like focus on like everyone else that's like slightly worse or slightly less conscious, right, or less perfect than we are, then we can be unscathed, even if we embrace our imperfection. And so for me, like what I'm learning is fragility isn't just like smalling down and tiptoeing. It's also like attacking.
Yeah.
Right. It's also aggressive and overt. And that call out culture. And I love the distinction that you made, that like, there's a calling in that's about accountability and community. And then there's a calling out that probably is more about ego, right? And self-preservation than anything else.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and it just reminds me of, and I just feel like you're modeling this. And I know that when I've come to you and like confessed my, character flaws and mistakes and fuck ups and, fall on my faces. There's something that happens in relationship that is really special and that can't be achieved by performance and by perfection, air quotes, and by looks, right. And moves and right words and even like skill. Like there's something beautiful that gets revealed when we show up for one another in the vulnerability of our mistake making and our not knowing.
Yeah. I know that's true because I've experienced it. And I think it's also important, and one of the things you say is go get your people. I think it's important that we are in acknowledgement of relationship and of context when we're having those moments. Just want to name that, of who we go to, right? So, right. So as I became
and who your people are, you know.
Yeah, who is that? Is for me, as I came to have a different understanding of when this organization started, I was working with all very wealthy, able-bodied white folks, girls, young women, really cisgendered young women. And in my mind and heart, the curriculum that I created served them well, and it did. And what I didn't foresee happening was the growth of Embody Love movement. I mean, I had no idea, which on some level is useful and on another was really harmful.
That's right.
Because as it started to grow, people started offering the same curriculum that sort of made sense for these young women from the same community, right? With all these axes we talked about earlier. But as the curriculum started to be used by different folks and with different communities, I knew in my heart and gut, this wasn't the intended use of this, and it's causing harm. And I had no idea what to do about it because I knew that I couldn't speak for folks from any other community or from any other lens or location than my own. And I knew enough that I couldn't just go to people of color, go to people that were disabled, that had come to facilitator training and ask them, can you correct my mistake, right? I can't ask somebody to speak on behalf of an entire group of people. And I can't do so without offering payment or offering decision-making power that's exploitative, right? And that's tokenizing. So it was like my consciousness was being raised, right? And I felt really helpless and I didn't want to stop there. So gratefully, we actually finally received a grant where I could offer folks who were not only representative of particular communities, but really academics and activists and leaders in their field and deep thinkers and educators around these issues of social justice from a few different lenses. So we could have input, not from me at all, right? Like the opposite of that around what we're doing, the harm that we're causing in ways that I could never have seen, really could never have seen. And I was so grateful to receive that feedback and be able to put it to use and be able to get my people and educate the other women or share in an education, because a lot of the women involved in Embody Love movement were already like just in different places in their journeys, but having some awareness, just depending, right? But to be able to take back to the community, okay, we've been stewarded, we've been offered information from folks living on the margins or that have been systemically oppressed, and here's a different way, here's a different lens. And when we can come from a systemic perspective, how we offer what we offer, even if we're offering a similar curriculum, even if we're offering similar exercises to lead and inspire girls and women toward restoring their sense of self-acceptance and rebuilding their self-approval, it's going to feel different. It's going to cause less harm. I mean, it's harm reduction, right? Because we're not going to get it all right. And I definitely am not there. I'm just like somewhere in the journey of awakening. And I think that's always going to be true, I would imagine. My first 42 years of life have told me that.
Yeah.
And, right. And hopefully we're doing a little less harm. We're offering more of an exchange of information and holding space in a different way that's much more humble and that's located where we're locating our different privileges.
Was that scary for you to like go to your community and be like, so we've been doing this wrong and we have to change everything, right? Because it's one thing to like take responsibility for a personal mistake, right? But you've like built this, so you have to go to everyone you're accountable to and be like, so turns out we made a mistake and we've been doing this, and it's not that you've been doing it all wrong. Like I think you're right. Like it's you've not been doing it with all the information, right? And with all of the perspectives and people in mind. And so we have to do something different. We have to do something better. How did people respond to that?
Yeah, people asked that, was that scary or assumed that must have been so scary? And I was like, no, that was the least scary thing I've done so far. There have been other moments, as you know, in Embody Love Movement where I've been really scared, like when we ran out of money that time. Like, oh, dear everyone.
In there.
And that was like 3 years ago. That was really scary for me. I felt the weight of that responsibility.
Yeah.
Because I knew as an ED and had been told so often, don't rely on singular sources of income, and making that mistake and having to go back to the community and redistribute the ways that we were going to achieve fundraising. Yeah. That was hard for me. Lots of tears were shed around that one. This, I felt so grateful that I felt like I could restore the integrity of Embody Love Movement and as much as I possibly could. And I had been in relationship with the curriculum and the way that it was being offered and to whom and by whom it was being offered, the different curriculums that we have in our programming, that wasn't quite right. It wasn't sitting right with me. And I knew it. And that was hard. Like that was the thing for me that felt really difficult, to be able to, I can't necessarily say right that wrong, but to come toward a place of acknowledgement and to make attempts at restoring and to be more in alignment with what I know is true, with systems that I know are in place and that are impacting at every level, each of our experiences, day in and day out. It actually felt wonderful. It didn't feel scary at all. I felt really grateful to be able to inform and to ask for information. And I think that was a big part of it too. It wasn't like I was just like, and I have made a mistake, and so now this, right? It was more like, here's what I've come to learn. And I know some of you have much more information than I do. And so can we come to, it felt really engaging with the community, more so than, yeah, I guess that's resiliency, and that's what you're talking about. Just,
well, it's not just, I just want to lift up that, because I think sometimes we think that if we just get aware, that's enough. And what I've heard from, my, colleagues and allies is that behavior is really required for this work, like changing behavior, right? Like, it's like, oh, if I just get woke and post things on social media that sound woke, I've done my job, right? And like, actually what people want to see is changed behavior. Like, I will do something differently based on this new level of consciousness. And I want to reflect back to you that I saw you do that, like that you were like, oh shit, right? You had the consciousness raising moment. And then you actually did a bunch of things differently to reorganize and realign your organization with this new radical truth. And that does a lot to repair relationships, right? Like that goes, right? We can't control like whether we can undo harm or repair harm, but it goes a long way, right, to tending to relationships and moving forward. And I just want to reflect that back to you.
Thank you for that. And that makes me want to just lift up our, I love how you called them our stewards. I was calling them our auditing board, and you're
I
like,
know, weird.
Very
IRS. but the right word, like they audited you, and and that was the right action.
That's right. RW ALFs, and all three of them actually are part of the summit. They graciously allowed us once again to lean on their wisdom.
They're so brilliant. I can't even.
All three of them. I mean, I did choose well. I will give myself credit for that.
Winners.
Michelle Cassandra Johnson, with whom you do a lot of work with around race and resilience and other things too. And Rosie Molinari, who also is such a powerhouse in the way in which she writes and teaches and speaks around body liberation and fat acceptance and self-acceptance. So those three, wow, right? And right, if you're happen to be watching this and feel like I've got some information for you, bring it. I welcome that. I want that. So, but having the three of them so far be involved and just help pointing out, hey, not this. This is harmful in ways you could never have seen or known. I just feel so grateful.
They're brilliant and amazing, and I've learned so much from them, like so much. And I also know that you have like a lot of contributors. Like you have an incredible network of people who are pushing you and challenging you and helping you see lots of different things. And that's one of the things I really admire about you. Like, you surround yourself by great teachers.
Well, you're one of them, if not the main one. And that's something else to be.
That's mutual.
Right. Thank you. For anyone who, who's a part of an organization, or who wants to be, or who's considering founding an organization. My fiance told me last night that she was surfing and a friend of hers was talking about starting an organization toward a particular thing. And I was like, she isn't asking for information, but I would just tell her to please do research about who's already doing that work before she decides I want to be a founder, right? Because looking back, I mean, that's another, I won't call it a mistake, because here we are, and it is, and I'm grateful for the work that Embody Love movement has offered in the world and will continue to offer, especially now and moving forward. And I didn't have that lens, right, to look around and see who else is already doing something like this, and how can I be in relationship with folks who are already invested in this kind of shift happening around me. And that would have not centered my privilege or my whiteness, but really been just invested in the work itself. I think that's really important. And being here a decade later, and being really grateful for all the opportunities, mostly for personal growth, that's come from doing what I thought would be service, but has actually ended up being the greatest service to me, is being part of a collective and a community that you named earlier. It's relationship. That the way that I've grown, the way that my consciousness has been raised, is because of relationship. It's because of women like you and people like you, who have been friends, who have been other founders, other activists, other organizers, other yoga teachers, other therapists that have come to me and said, hey, you got that wrong. You're probably not aware of the way that caused harm or could have caused harm, and been lovingly, but firmly and fiercely, right, raw truth, brought to my attention when something could have been done differently, said differently, felt differently, when I could have thought about it from a different place or from a wider lens. And that's everything. We've got to be in relationship with folks that aren't like us. And we've got to be in relationship, period, if we're doing any kind of work in the world that involves the vulnerability, the potential vulnerability of others. We just have to. We have to have folks that we're accountable to, that can help call us in and call us up.
Well, and I love that you also named the mapping that you did to understand like your place in the broader movement, right? And who else is doing this work, and is somebody already doing this work? And how are we all doing it differently? Because I do think, especially in like a capitalist, individualistic centric culture, and an entrepreneurial culture, we have a tendency to be like, I'm going to start a project and it's going to be the best and the biggest and the only project that's going to solve the problem. Right. And that's like, right. That's an old paradigm that reinforces not just separation, but like a culture of like scarcity and comparison and competition. It's just really unhealthy. And one of the things that I've gotten great comfort from over the last couple of years of doing movement work, especially in social justice, is like really people starting to embrace the idea of mutuality, and really understanding that we all have like a role to play, right? Like we all have a contribution to make, regardless of, our location. In fact, like we actually all have like a gift and a responsibility to the bigger picture and to the bigger issue. And when we understand ourselves in relationship to one another, we can see that I don't have to do everything, because you're doing this thing and I'm doing this other thing, and Nikki's doing that thing, right? And Sean's doing that thing, and Chelsea's doing that thing, and Michelle's doing that thing. And we're all a part of this larger ecosystem, and we're all necessary. And that was like radical for me, because the culture of like, perform, and your organization needs to be the best, and it needs to raise the most money, and it needs to take up all the space. It's just so it's so apparent in this culture.
Right. Yeah, you're right. And
it's hard to unhook.
Mm-hmm. And it's such a symptom of colonialism, supremacy,
Totally.
patriarchy. That's right. And it's a really beautiful, not so much an analogy as just like another way of understanding how individually amongst and between self-identified girls and women, the same thing occurs. Right. The work that we're trying to do with Embody Love movement, of body liberation, of self-acceptance, of self-approval, is that thing. It's saying, like, how have I internalized this systemic supremacy or systemic marginalization in such a way that cultivates conditions of worthiness, where there's not enough love, there's not enough acceptance. Right. The media is telling me this very clearly. The culture is sending me this. There won't be enough. And so how can I be the most acceptable in the room? How can I get, which ends up causing insecurity and then competition and comparison amongst us, instead of cultivating community and collaboration, right? It really comes down to that. And so we see it in media, social media and written media, film media. It's like giving us this idea, and then it's indoctrinated. So then it's in conversations too, that who between you and I, right, is the most beautiful? Who between you and I has the best body? Who between you and I is the sexiest or the most desirable? Which is such a setup. Everybody fails in that system. As long as we're in that race and committed to that race, we're losing it, really. And so I love that you name that, because it happens organizationally and probably because it happens individually when we buy into what they've been selling us our entire lives, and in every way, that I'm not enough unless I'm better than.
And as you were saying that, like, that's been me so many times. Like, so many times when I've like forgotten or lost track of like who I am and what matters, right? It especially happens when I'm moving too fast, when I'm too busy, when I'm unregulated, when I'm feeling too much pressure, right? I default, right, to that old consciousness. And I pit myself against other people, right? I forget that we're in it together, right? I forget that my worthiness is inherent to myself and isn't up to anybody else. Right. I'm just sharing that because this work feels so constant, right? Like the practice of like having to rewire our brains to know that for ourselves all the time. While everything around us, every message, every person, right, is reinforcing the other consciousness, right? The other belief that we're never going to be good enough, and that we have to be in control of everything, and we have to preserve our power and our positionality, right? Like that's what we learn from culture. And to disrupt that takes so much practice and so much fellowship.
So I love that word. I love the reclaiming of that word, actually.
I know, me too. I'm really into it right now.
Word fellowship, as I named earlier. That makes me think of Lynn Twist's work. You know, she wrote that book, The Soul of Money.
Yeah.
And talks about how we have this myth of there's not enough money, and how it's as though we're playing, what was that game we played when we were little kids? Some of us, Duck, Duck, Goose, or not Duck, Duck, Goose, musical chairs, where, right, the music is played and you walk around in a circle and a chair is taken away, so one person's left out. And we're indoctrinated into that kind of culture where
someone's going to be left out.
Someone's going to be left out, and like, it's not going to be me. I'm not going to be, I'm going to run the fastest and get the chair the quickest, right? That happens in self-identified girls and women, where someone's going to be left out. And so I have to have the better body. I have to work out harder. I have to eat less or more, depending on our, it's wild that we don't have a culture where we celebrate autonomy around our choices, around what makes us beautiful, around our own enoughness, around where we don't embrace our inherent worthiness. But that's not what any of us, regardless of our positionality or our location, have been indoctrinated into. Not in this culture where we're sitting, right? So I think that the undoing of that, like you said, the kind of neuro-linguistic repatterning of coming to understand, I can be in total celebration and in awe of you, whoever you are, not just you, anyone, and it doesn't take away at all my access, my own worthiness, my own potential, my own beauty. my own sense of belonging and acceptance. They're not unrelated, but they're not related in the way in which we've made the relationship competitive and comparative. They're actually related in the way in which the liberation is bound, in the way in which we're actually in this together.
That feels really important, and it feels actually like the right note to end on, because I think because we're trained to like understand things as binary, right? When we start to like unpack our individualism, right? We assume that we're trading that in for a collectivism that that doesn't acknowledge anybody, right? That acknowledges the whole, and everybody becomes invisible inside of that. And what I've learned so much from your work, and from the work of spiritual practice, is that the possibility, right, when we unlearn scarcity, right, when we dismantle ideologies of individualism and capitalism and white supremacy, isn't, when we understand how culture works and how we're indoctrinated in it, is that we actually get to be our whole, most radical, fully expressed selves, and be in relationship within a context where everyone else gets to be that way too. Like, we actually get to live our purpose and pursue it fiercely in the world, and be self-expressed and be loud and radical and take up space. And there's enough room for everyone to thrive in their own way, on their own terms. And I know there's equity in there, and there's considerations around location, but that, like, changing our mind about the possibility of that feels so radical and paradigm shifting in this particular moment, that we actually can have both.
Mm-hmm. Our mind and our heart. That it's not just, can we have both? We have to.
Yeah, right. We need everyone.
We need everyone, which includes each of us. Yeah.
Well, I love you so frickin' damn much. I want to use every curse in the book. And I just so admire and look up to the way in which you've modeled leadership, and the way that you have allowed yourself to be vulnerable and to be revealed and to be seen in all of your growth and mistake making, and the way in which you trust your community. You trust them to take the torch, and to lead, and to make this movement what they want it to be, right? And not what you want it to be. And to embrace the, I don't know what's next. I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know what will happen for the next 10 years, but it's going to be fucking great.
Right? It's not up to me. And I'm committed and staying invested in creating liberation for all, and creating reclamation of beauty autonomy. I just love that phrase that I think you might have come up with.
I don't know. I just learned so much this weekend at your summit that my head is spinning.
I know, still. And I can't thank you enough, Kerri Kelly. We didn't really name it because you're interviewing me, but I know that you know, and I hope everybody watching and listening understands that having someone, I always say 5 steps ahead. I think the nomenclature is too.
It's more like a pinky toe.
But it never feels that way to me. It feels like always 5 steps ahead of me, that's pulling me forward and coaching me. It makes me think about, sometimes you'll direct me, and then I think you're kind of like on pins and needles, like, is she actually going to do that thing I said she would do? Like, what is that like? I've coached people into doing things that I do, right? It's like in teaching yoga. I can direct somebody who has a different capacity, different flexibility, different strength than me, how to do something. My body can't do it, but I'm like, I think you can. Like, and I wonder if that's what it's like. Feel like she actually did the thing.
Well, because you're doing it for everyone else.
Yeah. So I cannot thank you enough. What leadership you truly have as a coach, as an inspiration, as a leader, mostly, of course, as a friend, but really we have much more than a friendship, because you're constantly 5 steps ahead, letting yourself fall on your face, which is the reason you grow so quickly. You do, I think, move at the speed of trust when you're in your wholeness. And in doing so, I can speak for me, look to you as like, okay, what else do we not know? What else do we need to learn? How else do we need to be building relationship? How else do we need to be in our own integrity? And I'm just so deeply grateful for you and the way that you're committed to this work. So since we're highlighting me here, if you don't know, follow Citizen Well.
Oh, I love you.
Kerri Kelly's organization. Follow, read Well Read. It's like what I look forward to. It's Wednesday. You must be writing it today.
Oh my God, I am.
Wednesday night to see like, what is Kerri saying? Who do we follow? What actions can we take? And listen to her.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I want to say in response to what you said is lineage.
Yeah.
Is like there were people before me who were doing the exact same thing. And thank God for teachers and for relationship and for the kinds of relationships where we get to pick each other up off the floor and say it's going to be okay and you're going to survive and it's going to be better. And I've just loved having that relationship with you. So thank you.
Thank you.
True freedom unleashes the power of unity, enables us to feel our empathy and compassion with a true sense of identity. Who are we? Powerful beyond measure.